I was hauling a heavy load down the twisting Appalachian Backroads at 3:12 a.m. when my headlights hit something standing dead center in the road. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a person. It just stood there, staring straight into my cab, and the closer I got, the less it moved. Some roads out there, you don't stop, no matter what you see. Welcome back to Little Ravens. Tonight, 4 true accounts from truckers who drove the cursed roads of Appalachia and barely made it out alive. I've been driving long haul for almost a decade, and most nights on the road are the same. Engine noise, empty highways, and too much time alone with your own thoughts. But there are certain routes drivers talk about in low voices, usually at truck stops around 2 or 3 in the morning. Roads where people claim they saw things that shouldn't be there. I never believed any of it until that night in the Appalachians. The run wasn't supposed to be mine. Another driver dropped the load last minute, and dispatch asked if I could take it instead. Extra miles, extra pay, so I said yes without thinking twice. If I had known what road that route would send me through, I would have refused. By the time I reached the mountains, it was already after 3 a.m. The highway slowly turned into a narrow 2-lane road surrounded by dense forest on both sides. There were no streetlights, no houses, nothing but trees and fog. My headlights felt like they were being swallowed by the darkness ahead. The road kept twisting through the mountains, sharp turns one after another. I hadn't seen another car for almost 40 minutes. Even the radio had turned to pure static. It felt like I was completely alone out there. After a while, I noticed something strange. My GPS signal started cutting in and out, the map freezing and then jumping forward. At one point, the road on the screen didn't even match the road I was on anymore. It showed me driving through empty space. I tapped the screen a couple times, trying to refresh the signal. That's when I saw the sign on the side of the road. It was an old wooden sign, not reflective like normal road signs. It looked carved by hand. I only caught it in my peripheral vision as I passed, but I'm sure of what it said. It had only one word on it: turn. I remember thinking it was probably some old local sign, or maybe part of a hiking trail. Still, it gave me a weird feeling in my stomach when I passed it. I checked my mirrors out of habit. The road behind me was completely dark. A few minutes later, my CB radio suddenly exploded with static. It was so loud I actually jumped in my seat. I reached over and turned the volume down a little. Then I heard a voice through the static. It was a man's voice, very calm and very clear, not distorted like most CB signals in the mountains. He only said one sentence: "You missed the turn." I grabbed the radio and answered immediately. "Say again?" "Who's that?" But the moment I spoke, the radio went completely silent. No static, no voice, nothing. I tried changing channels, calling out for any driver nearby. No one answered. It was like I was the only truck on that entire mountain. That's when I started to feel really uncomfortable. About 10 minutes later, fog started rolling across the road. At first, it was just thin patches. Then it got thicker and thicker. Soon my headlights could barely see past the next curve. I slowed the truck down to be safe. Then I saw something ahead of me on the road. At first, I thought it was a deer. There are always deer in those mountains at night, but this thing wasn't moving. As I got closer, I realized it was standing in the middle of my lane. Tall, very tall. Too tall to be a person, and it wasn't shaped like a deer either. I started slowing down more, trying to understand what I was looking at. The fog moved slightly, and my headlights hit its face. That's when I saw the eyes. They reflected the light like an animal's eyes, but they were too high off the ground. The thing didn't move. It just stood there, facing my truck. I flashed my high beams, hoping it would run off the road. It didn't react at all. I remember saying out loud, "Move. Come on, move." But it just stood there in the exact same position. I started to feel this pressure in my chest, like something was very wrong. Every instinct was telling me not to stop the truck. so I started to steer slightly to the left to go around it. As soon as the truck moved toward the other lane, the thing moved too. Just one slow step in the same direction, like it was blocking me on purpose. That was the moment I felt real fear. Not nervous, not uncomfortable, real fear. The kind that makes your hands shake. I hit the accelerator and tried to pass it quickly. The truck roared as I pushed it forward. For a second, the thing disappeared in the fog beside my truck. Then I turned my head to the driver's window. It was right there next to my cab, keeping the same speed as my truck, just walking beside me like it weighed nothing. Its head slowly turned toward me. I could see its face clearly for 1 second. Its skin looked gray and stretched tight. No expression, no emotion, nothing human in its face. Just those bright eyes staring directly at me. I slammed the accelerator all the way down. The engine screamed as the truck picked up speed. I didn't look at it again. I just kept driving and driving. After a few minutes, the fog suddenly disappeared. The road straightened out, and I saw highway lights in the distance. I didn't slow down until I reached a gas station almost 30 miles later. My hands were still shaking when I parked. Inside the gas station, there was an older truck driver drinking coffee. He looked at me and asked if I came from the mountain road. I told him yes and asked how he knew. He didn't look surprised at all. He just nodded slowly and said, "Did you see the sign that says turn?" I didn't answer right away. He kept looking at me. Then he said something I will never forget. Everyone who ignores that sign sees something on that road. I asked him what the sign meant. He finished his coffee before answering. Then he said quietly, "It means that road isn't for you. Some roads aren't on maps for a reason." What makes this story disturbing isn't just what was standing in the road. It's the sign that said, "Turn," and the voice that knew he missed it. That suggests it wasn't random. A lot of truck drivers say the same thing about isolated mountain roads. If something feels wrong, you don't question it. You just keep driving. And you? Which option would you choose? Turn, stop, or keep accelerating? Leave your comments below. I was driving a night route through West Virginia, hauling a refrigerated trailer with a delivery deadline, early in the morning. It was one of those long, empty highway stretches where you can drive for an hour and not see another car. Around 2:30 a.m., I stopped at a small gas station that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 80s. I just needed coffee and to stretch my legs for a few minutes. There was only one car in the parking lot, and the place was almost empty inside. The cashier looked half asleep, and there was a guy sitting by the window drinking coffee alone. I grabbed my coffee, paid, and was heading back to the truck when I heard someone behind me say, "Hey driver, you heading north?" I turned around and saw the same guy from the window. He looked normal enough. Jeans, dark jacket, maybe mid-40s. He said his car broke down a few miles back and asked if I could drop him near the next town. I know we're not supposed to pick up passengers, but he seemed normal, and it was freezing outside. I told him I could take him to the next exit. Nothing more. He thanked me and climbed into the passenger seat of the truck. For the first few minutes, we just drove in silence while I got back onto the highway. Then he started talking. He asked how long I'd been driving trucks, asked if I liked night routes, asked if I drove this road often. Normal conversation, but something about the way he talked felt off, like he already knew the answers to the questions. About 20 minutes into the drive, he said something that made my stomach drop. He said, "You usually pass this road around 3:15, right?" I looked at the dashboard clock. It was 3:14 a.m. I asked him what he meant by that. He just looked out the windshield and said, "Timing is important on roads like this." Then he smiled a little, but it wasn't a friendly smile. I started to feel very uncomfortable at that point. I asked him which exit he needed, trying to move the conversation along. He didn't answer right away. He just kept looking out into the darkness ahead. After a few seconds, he said quietly, Not the next exit. The one after the bridge. I didn't remember any bridge on that route, but I figured maybe I just forgot. It was a long night, and all highways start to look the same after a while. About 10 minutes later, we reached a long, dark bridge over a river. No lights, no other cars, just the truck and the sound of the tires on the metal surface. Halfway across the bridge, he suddenly said, "You can slow down." I didn't like the sound of that at all. I asked why, and he said, "Because this is where it usually happens." I felt a cold sensation run down my back when he said that. I asked him what he was talking about. He turned his head slowly and looked directly at me. Then he said something I still think about all the time. He said, "This is where I died." I immediately thought the guy was crazy. I told him I was taking the next exit, and he needed to get out. He didn't argue. He just nodded and looked forward again. When we got off the highway, I pulled into a closed gas station and told him this was as far as I was going. I turned to the passenger seat to tell him to get out. The seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes and looked around the cab. There was nowhere he could have gone. The doors were still locked, and the truck had never stopped since the bridge. I jumped out of the truck and checked the parking lot. No one. No cars. Nothing. I got back in the truck, and that's when I noticed something on the passenger seat. A wet footprint, like someone had stepped there with a wet shoe. I didn't sleep for almost 2 days after that run. A week later, I stopped at the same gas station again and asked the cashier if he remembered a guy who stayed there sometimes. Mid-40s, dark jacket. The cashier looked at me for a few seconds and then said, "You mean the guy who died on the bridge a few years ago?" I didn't answer. I just left the coffee on the counter and walked back to my truck. Picking up hitchhikers is something most truck drivers avoid, especially at night. But what makes this story disturbing isn't that the passenger disappeared. It's that he knew the exact time, the road, and the bridge where he died. Some drivers say certain highways don't just carry freight. They carry stories that never really ended. If you enjoy realistic horror stories like this, subscribe to the channel and listen carefully. The next story might be worse. I was hauling a load through Kentucky on a route I'd done many times before. It was a quiet night, clear sky, almost no traffic on the highway. Those are usually the easiest drives, steady speed, cruise control, just watching the road for hours. Around 1:40 in the morning, I saw a sign ahead for a weigh station. Normally, I don't worry about weigh stations unless the sign says open, but this one was different. The big electronic sign above the road was on, and it clearly said, "All trucks must enter." I remember thinking it was strange, because most weigh stations close late at night. Still, when the sign says enter, you enter. So I slowed down, put on my signal, and pulled into the weigh station ramp. As soon as I turned off the highway, everything felt wrong. The parking lot lights were on, but there were no other trucks there. No officers, no workers, no movement at all. The place looked open, but completely empty. I drove slowly toward the scale and stopped where I was supposed to. Usually, there's a speaker where they talk to you, tell you to pull forward or park. But there was no voice, no instructions, nothing. Just silence and the sound of my engine idling. I waited for about 30 seconds, then the speaker suddenly crackled with static. I expected someone to tell me to pull forward. Instead, a voice came through the speaker and said, "Turn off your engine and step outside the vehicle." That's not normal procedure for a weigh station. They check weight, logs, sometimes paperwork, but they don't usually ask you to shut down and step out unless it's an inspection. Still, the voice sounded official, calm and clear. So I turned off the engine and grabbed my paperwork. When I opened the truck door and stepped outside, the silence hit me immediately. No highway noise, no insects, nothing. It was completely quiet. I walked toward the small office building next to the scale. The lights were on inside, but I didn't see anyone through the windows. The front door was slightly open. I knocked on the door and said, Driver on the scale? No answer. I pushed the door open and walked inside. The office lights were on, computers on, papers on the desk, coffee in a mug. But there was no one there. It looked like someone had just stepped out for a minute. Then I heard the speaker again. But this time, it was inside the office. The same voice said, "Please return to your vehicle." I didn't like that at all. I walked back outside quickly and looked around the parking lot again. Still no other trucks, no cars, no officers, nothing. I climbed back into my truck and started the engine. The moment the engine started, the big electronic sign near the exit suddenly turned on again. It now said something different. "You are overweight. Park and wait." That made no sense. My load was well within limits, and I had already checked the weight earlier that day. I grabbed my paperwork again, ready to go back to the office. Before I could open the door, the speaker turned on again. The voice said, "Remain in the vehicle." At this point, I was starting to get angry more than scared. I picked up the CB radio and tried to contact any drivers nearby. I asked if anyone else was at that way station. One driver responded after a few seconds. He said, "What way station? That one's been closed for years." I felt my stomach drop when he said that. I looked back at the office building. The lights were still on. The door was still open. I asked him again what he meant. He said, "Yeah, that way station shut down after an accident. Nobody works there anymore." I slowly looked toward the building again, and that's when the lights inside went out all at once. The office went completely dark. At the same time, the speaker next to my truck turned on one last time. The voice sounded different now. Slower, lower. It said, "You can leave now." I didn't wait. I pulled off the scale, drove straight to the exit, and got back onto the highway. As I passed the main sign again, I looked over at the way station one last time. There were no lights on anymore, no open office, no electronic signs. Just an abandoned building and an empty parking lot. A few miles later, I pulled over at a rest area and searched the way station online. The first result was a news article from years ago. It said a truck driver had lost control while pulling into the way station and crashed into the office building. 2 employees died in the accident. Sometimes I still drive that route, and every time I pass that exit at night, I look over at the way station. I've never seen the lights on again. Most drivers don't like way stations, but at least they're supposed to be predictable. What makes this story disturbing is that everything looked normal. Lights on, office open, instructions over the speaker, except the place had been closed for years. If the radio driver was right, then whoever or whatever was giving those instructions wasn't supposed to be there at all. What would your reaction be? Would you have any reaction, or would you be paralyzed? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know. I was driving a late-night run through Tennessee near the Great Smoky Mountains, a long, empty stretch of highway with hills on both sides and almost no traffic after midnight. It was around 2 a.m., and I had been driving for hours without seeing more than a few cars. Those kinds of roads can mess with your head because everything starts to look the same after a while. I remember checking my mirrors out of habit, like I always do every few seconds. At one point, I noticed something far behind me on the road. It looked like a vehicle, but I couldn't see headlights, just a dark shape moving in the same lane as me. At first, I thought maybe it was a car with broken headlights, which would be insane but not impossible. But as the minutes passed, the shape slowly got closer. Still no headlights. No marker lights. Nothing. Just a darker shape inside the darkness. I started to feel uncomfortable and sped up a little to create distance. Normally, if someone is behind you, they either pass or fall back. This vehicle did neither. It kept the exact same distance behind me. I changed lanes to the right to let it pass. The vehicle changed lanes too. I went back to the left lane. A few seconds later, it moved back to the left lane behind me. That's when I knew it was following me. I picked up the CB radio and asked if any drivers were behind me on that highway. After a few seconds, another truck driver responded and said he was about 5 miles behind me, but he didn't see anyone between us. I asked him again to be sure. He said, "Nope, you're alone out there." I didn't tell him what I was seeing. I just said thanks and put the radio down slowly. And I checked my mirrors again. The truck was still there, same distance, still no lights. I decided to slow down to force it to pass me. I gradually reduced speed by about 10 miles per hour. The vehicle behind me slowed down too, keeping the same distance. At that point, I was more nervous than scared. I didn't understand how a truck could drive at night with no lights at all. It didn't make sense. Up ahead, I saw a rest area sign and decided I would pull in there, where there would hopefully be other drivers. As soon as I put on my signal and started slowing down toward the exit ramp, something strange happened. The truck behind me suddenly sped up, very fast. It closed the distance between us in just a few seconds. I looked into the mirror, expecting to finally see headlights when it got close, but there were still no lights. Instead, I saw the shape of an old semi-truck, boxy, older model, and it was getting very close to my trailer. I got scared it was going to hit me, so I accelerated again and stayed on the highway instead of taking the exit. The moment I sped up, it stayed right behind me again, matching my speed perfectly. Then I noticed something that made my hands start shaking. I could see the driver through the windshield of the truck behind me. He was sitting completely still, both hands on the wheel, not moving at all, and the truck still had no lights. We drove like that for maybe another 5 minutes. Then I saw another exit coming up with a gas station right off the highway. This time, I didn't signal early. At the last second, I took the exit quickly. The truck behind me kept going straight on the highway. It didn't follow me off the exit. I pulled into the gas station and parked near the building where the lights were bright. I got out of the truck and just stood there for a minute, trying to calm down. Another driver who was parked there asked if I was okay because I looked pale. I told him a truck had been following me with no lights for almost 20 miles. He looked at me for a few seconds and then asked, "Old truck? Looked like it was from the 80s or 90s? I said yes. He nodded slowly and said, "Yeah. A driver died on this highway years ago. Night run. They say his truck still runs that route sometimes." I didn't drive that highway again at night after that. Seeing another truck on the highway at night is normal. Seeing one with no lights, keeping the exact same distance for miles, isn't. What makes this story disturbing is that the other driver on the CB said the road was empty, which means whatever was behind him wasn't showing up for anyone else. Some drivers say certain routes never really lose their last driver. So those were 4 true truck driver stories from the Appalachian roads and the night highways of America. And if you've noticed, none of these stories end with an explanation. No police reports, no clear answers, no proof of what really happened. Just drivers who saw something they can't explain and roads they don't drive anymore. So now I want to ask you something. If you were alone on a mountain road at 3 a.m. and saw something standing in the middle of the road, would you stop? Would you turn around? Or would you just keep driving and pretend you didn't see anything? And if a truck followed you for miles with no lights, would you pull over? Or would you drive until sunrise? Tell me in the comments. I read all of them. If you enjoy realistic horror stories, true encounters, and night road stories like these, subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories in the archive, and some of them are much worse than these. On the final screen, you'll find 2 more videos to continue your journey on dark and terrifying roads, but don't watch it alone.